Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 77. I'm going to do things a little bit different today. I've got a prior commitment, but I wanted to record a quick message on what is happening right now. We are at a vital time. Although we could talk about Bitcoin, the Bitcoin story hasn't changed much this week. What has changed is the macro and geopolitical side. And so, what I'm going to do today is I did a space with a group of people where I went through exactly what I think is happening right now with the Trump tariffs, why this is not normal, and why everybody needs to understand what's happening. Now, whether you believe the reasons that I give for why it has happened is irrelevant. I just want to give a few points to help you understand why the market is telling us that something very different is happening right now that you need to be prepared for in the macro side. And then I'll tie it into a little bit of the geopolitical. Now, what I want you to do is listen to that space. And towards the end of the space, there's like a few hours where I just ask questions. You don't need to go through that if you don't want to, but go through the first part where I go through exactly what's happening with these tariffs, what I think is happening. And most importantly, when we started to invite some people up, I went through some solutions. Now, the solutions is the most important thing. I want as many people prepared as possible. So whether you watch this whole thing and listen to all the Q&A and all the answers and all the debates and other people's opinion is up to you. But I'm going to just give you a quick overview right now. Then we're going to head over to the space recording for this week. And then make sure you watch it at least to the solutions section. And then if you want to carry on after that, you can. Okay, so I just want to make sure that everyone's got that. So let's just do a quick recap of exactly what happened this week in the macro side so that you can understand what's going on. So firstly, the tariff war that we covered last week in previous broadcasts, and I shared what I thought it was, is manifesting as I thought it would. And we're hitting the stage where immediately it started to shift away from all the different countries over to China. And so Trump came out with a 54% tariff on China. And that's, if you listen to previous broadcasts, I said that's the only one that really matters. Everything else is a bit of a distraction. And then China retaliated with a 34% tariff. Now, immediately, there was a major correction in the stock market. And while that got all the headlines, what was more important is to look at the bond market. Now, remember, there's lots of narratives going around, some people saying that this is a strategy in order to crash the market so that the rates go down so they can refinance the $10 trillion that the Trump administration needs to refinance this year. And then they can force the hand of the Federal Reserve to lower rates. Well, none of that worked. In fact, the exact opposite happened. So while the stock market crashed and everybody was concerned about the value of their 401ks and the value of their stocks, and everyone was freaking out saying he's playing 5D chess, 6D chess, 65D chess, and everyone had completely different, very smart people, completely different theories. Very few had a cohesive argument for what was happening. Now, you know me, I follow the money. And I give my 3-layer theory in this space, and you can go through that. I won't go through that now. That really helps people understand rather than listening to what the PR and the narratives and various other things are. Okay, so the bond market and the amount of bonds which are going to be refinanced, the $10 trillion, they're going to be refinanced with longer dated bonds, which means a 10-year loan to the government or a 30-year loan to the government. And they started performing in the opposite way of what is needed in order to refinance the debt. And it started to look similar to the types of trends that were precursor any type of global financial crisis, systemic risk event. Now, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but I genuinely believe you need to get ahead of this one because the Trump administration is trying to make it out like, all good, this was our negotiation tactic. But in fact, the market crashed, the bonds went up, and Scott Bessent, who knows that this is a major problem because the dollar was crashing. The yield on the 10-year and 30-year bonds were going up, which means that people are selling bonds. And immediately the European banks, like the Credit Suisses, would be contacting the Fed and say, please, what are we going to be doing here? This is going to create a cascading effect with all of the credit risks and the mortgage rates and all the markets, the auto loan financing, the student loans, everything that gets its rate from the longer term 10-year bonds. And because that was going up, this is going to break something. So the value of America's debt, the $27 trillion, is worth more in dollar terms as the market corrects. And the price at which they're going to refinance, the rate that is going to be paid, was going up as well. So this was making the ballooning debt of America, which is going to cause issues because it's the backbone of all of the entire financial debt-based Ponzi scheme. And so Trump had to cave. So while there were a bunch of people complaining about the price of their stocks, I believe it was, Besant that was saying, this is breaking. Now, in my theory, you can go through the space that I believe that this is the design because it is a deliberate capital outflow strategy. Not because Trump wants to do it, but because global finance want to do it. But I go through that in the space. But Trump caved. He had to repackage it as a success. This was 5G chess and we won and China is evil and all of that stuff. But the reality is that this was going to be a global financial crisis type of systemic risk event. Now, what did he do? Well, he got a bunch of bankers round. There was famous videos out there where it was recording when maybe he didn't realize it was recording, and Charles Schwab was there. And Trump was telling his buddies at the banks that, hey, I'm going to tweet this. And then he made $1 billion and they made it. And then people like Bill Ackman came out and said, oh, yeah, Trump's playing it great because he was long. He was about to lose his shirt. And then Trump turned the market around. So obviously those that are important to him, they got the favors and they made a shit ton of money out of the market because he came back and announced that we're taking off all tariffs and we're focusing on China. We're going to slap 143% on China, or I think it was 125 and then it's gone up, or whatever it was, 143. It's hard to keep up with everything. And everybody else, we're going to hold off for 90 days, but they're going to be in the flat 10% while we figure out what's going on. And then China retaliated, and now it's gone up to about 125% from China to America, and everybody else has got their 10%. And now Trump has come out and said there is a 90-day pause. Now, the market loved that. The stock market reacted. There was wild volatility, a massive swing up over 10% in stocks. And there was an air of calm, but the bond market was still broken. And the bond market is what real capital is doing. This is, whether they're willing to invest in America and what rate America needs to pay in order to refinance its debt and persuade people to continue buying treasuries. So now we're in the negotiation stage. Now this could keep going up. And there is an element of that, I think, is over to Trump right now. China's retaliated. And then we keep going up. But in the meantime, business have to actually pay these rates. And so the small business in America is going to have to pay these rates if it wants to import from China. Now, China's just going to slap the price on top. They're going to take the same price and then charge the small business in America 125% more. Now, the small business is going to say, I can't afford that. I've got to go find a completely new route, but they're buying off China and they're going to be, they don't have tariffs like that with China and they may get their 10% tariff. And so in the end, there's going to be routes around this, but the small business is just completely in lockdown. This is exactly like the COVID lockdown in terms of the impact on small business. Anybody that relies upon these imports, they just can't do business right now. And if they can get their imports as usual, they either have to pay 125% more or they have to find a new route that China goes through in order to get the 10%, but it eats up their 10% margin. And most businesses can't afford to eat into their 10% margin or 125%. So they're going to have to put their prices up, and therefore goods are going to get more expensive to everyday consumers within America. Now, the large businesses, they don't care. Why? Because the large businesses are multinational global financial institutions. They can use their different routes. They got factories in China, like Apple. They got factories, they got locations in America. They've invested across the whole world. They have global backers, and they'll go in and sit down with the Trump administration and say, right, can we get a tax credit here, a tariff there? We'll build a plant here. We'll invest this amount here. We'll move it over there. Can you make that a tax neutral distribution? And therefore, let's do a deal, and it won't affect them in any way, shape, or form. So this means that there'll be an increase in mergers and acquisitions, distressed business, and an environment where essentially the Trump administration are going to have to find a similar event like COVID, potentially, where they do some, before it was called a PPP loan, but there may be distress and encouragement of the banks to not seize up the small business, or you let the small business go and you have bankruptcies in small business like we had in COVID, and large companies consolidate the industry. They probably move over to M&A. And this is a consolidation of wealth to the large businesses, large multinational corporations that can handle this anyway. So we had a bit of a stock market recovery, but throughout this whole thing, smart investors are recognizing that the rate at which you have to pay on the 10-year bond went up to 4.3% and is continuing to go up. So it's spiking. At the same time, the dollar was crashing, and the 30-year was going up to 4.6% and beyond. These are unsustainable rates. This means if America were to refinance its debt, it has to pay significantly more with a weaker dollar, with a larger amount of debt that is looking to finance in terms of, these capital flows. And so this is essentially, we had a 2% crash in the dollar because foreign investors were selling their treasuries. They were selling their bond and they were going into other currencies. They went into gold, and gold started to reach new all-time highs. Again, they were going into the Swiss franc. The Swiss franc had almost a negative interest rate at one point, which is a safe haven currency. They went into the Japanese yen. They went into, so they were selling down and essentially getting out. And therefore, as those sell-off was happening, the rates getting higher and higher and higher. This is broken. So while the stock market may have recovered, this is the real market that you should be looking at. Now, the dollar crashed 2%. 2% in the dollar is, to give you some context, as much as the coordinated Plaza Accord, where all of the central banks would get together, global finance, and in a coordinated fashion, decide to weaken the dollar on purpose to rebalance trade. And that only went down about 4.5%. This went 2% based upon an uncoordinated, just simple market forces based upon what we are experiencing right now. This means that essentially, this is the reason why there was a gold standard, just so you know. Gold was used in order to rebalance these fiscal and trade flows between nation states. And in 71, the Nixon shock happened, where it went off the gold standard fully, or removed the convertibility of the dollar into gold, which is a default, and then entered into this ZERP, low interest rate, debt-based Ponzi scheme, fiat currency wildness. And now we're actually having an impact on that, because the big capital was asset stripping all along. They were created a bubble, and now they are looking at selling their treasuries, and capital flows are changing. And the Trump administration has essentially done something that I think is irreversible, which is what I think he was paid to do in the first place. I go through that in the space. And so that really gives you the foundation of where we are, to say this is serious. This isn't recoverable. This is a systemic change in the world order and the financial system, and I believe a outflow of capital to recollaborate the world away from dollar dominance, but in a controlled mechanism. Because anything in the space I go through, why there is no way that China loses this trade war. Like, it's only of its exports, only 15%, less than 15% go to America. So you could lose, China could lose all of that. It's got an estimated 22,500 tons of gold, $3 trillion of reserves, and 85% of all of its exports are to non-US. And US is saying we're the largest credit card, which to a degree is true, but it's not, the susceptibility to shocks of the US market is unparalleled relative to the susceptibility of shocks in the China market. So taking away those export sales is painful. It will create a global recession. But China's equipped to take that global recession. America's not. You could have knock-on effects in the credit markets, in the mortgage markets, in the commercial real estate markets. All of the leverage of debt is something that will have a knock-on effect. And so this is a very, very serious event. And I just want you to educate yourself on it. I want you to watch the space where I go through my narrative of what I think is happening and why. And then that leads to what you need to do to protect yourself. And if you want to carry on watching the Q&A, you can. At the same time, on the geopolitical side, my theory that I covered last week and the week before, I think is playing out. We are getting that strategic escalation to lead to a de-escalation. And the Trump administration has given as much strategic power to Israel in order to negotiate against the new powers in the region, which is the Gulf Cooperation, the GCC, the Saudis, the Qataris, the Emiratis. I think that is playing out right now. And there was a visit from Netanyahu to the White House with Trump. And for the first time, this was a second visit under the Trump administration. This one was very different. There was a defeated Netanyahu that returned from a trip to Hungary, which may be his exit strategy in order to avoid all the crimes against humanity that he's going to have to face as soon as this war is over. And Trump was a bit more aggressive. He looked very defeated. He talked about how Israel gets $4 billion, which was a bit of a slap, saying you're kind of extracting value. He also said that America is good friends with Turkey, and Turkey and Israel are in a rivalry over Syria right now. And, by saying that don't do anything, Turkey's our friends, that was a shift of power away from Israel over to Turkey. And right in front of Netanyahu, he said, this Saturday, we're going to be negotiating and meeting with Iran. So this is a clear shift in narrative, which is completely in line with what I've been predicting on the geopolitical side, that because of the vast capital of the GCC, they're involved in many of these financial flows. I believe Saudi and China, they own a lot of America. They've got board position on the global capital seats like BlackRock. They have massive assets in America. It's why China doesn't want to blow up America. China wants a controlled capital flow, and it's got a lot of investment in America. So it's trying to manage that in a controlled environment. And global capital is saying that we need to reposition. The old dollar standard is no longer working, and the Fed's going to have to do something drastic. Maybe they pump the scheme one more time, or the Fed can't do nothing because the long-term rates are out of control. And so the Fed is stuck. But if they can do something, find a tool to reverse this, it's going to have a very negative impact as well, because the Fed right now is damned if they do, damned if they don't. If they don't, then you get this capital outflows that we're experiencing, which is happening right now with foreigners selling off their assets, putting it into Swiss francs, putting it into gold, and recollaborating capital. As more of those outflows go into other countries, you'll get a redistribution. And almost, I believe, what did all the central banks do? They were buying gold. What did BlackRock do? Well, they got all of their clients into Bitcoin, and is now pushing a narrative that the dollar world reserve currency could be replaced by Bitcoin. And these are the people that do control finance. These are the people that own America, global, multinational financial institutions that through securitization and financialization of everything owns all the politicians in America, owns the assets, and owns the policy through lobby. And so it's not Trump. Trump is just installed to execute what global capital wants him to execute, because everything he's doing is for those that paid for him to be president, essentially. So Netanyahu on the global side defeated. And so I expect any minute now a ceasefire announcement to come through, a return to that, and then that will move to a negotiation where the Egypt plan that involved the GCC investing $53 billion in the rebuild of Gaza will be negotiated. And obviously Trump and all his buddies will try and profit from that situation, because that was the deal that they get. And I believe this leads to some kind of regime change within Israel and some kind of nuclear deal with Iran that may be reciprocal with Israel, where they have to, for the first time, declare their illegal nukes that Israel assassinated JFK to steal from America, and they've been hiding ever since. So there may be some kind of reciprocal nuclear deal. I'm not sure what exactly what's going to look like, but I expect a ceasefire to be announced in Gaza, the Egypt plan with the GCC to be negotiated, and I believe that Iran is already normalized with the region, and Israel is going to be regime change, get rid of Netanyahu with the increasing aggression, and move into an environment of peace in the Middle East, because of the global capital flows are all coming into the Middle East, into China, away from America, and Europe is being sacrificed at the same time. So all of this is to say is that massive, massive changes are happening. If you've been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, then you know these trends because you've been watching every week, and we try and get everybody ahead of it. But obviously, Trump's going to come through saying, I got peace in the Middle East. He'll get his Nobel Peace Prize. And so, just I want you to be one step ahead. And the most important thing is get through the space recording and then get to the solution part at the end when a first person comes up, and then I interrupt them to say, I want to talk about solutions. And then if you want to carry on listening, you can carry on listening. So at least get through that. And that's going to do everything that I've got for you right now for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 77. And we're going to move over to the space recording. And do me a favor, put some comments below. Whether you're listening to this on the podcast, do subscribe on YouTube. And we're going up. We're getting the subscribers have been going up. I think the algorithm has shifted slightly, but I still need your help to get over the 100K mark. So without that, without further ado, let's move over to the space recording, and I'll see you this time next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 78. Peace.
Yeah, so Simon, over to you. Give us your take.
Okay,
What's
cool.
going on?
All right, awesome. Right, I want to put in a few pre-framers because whenever I talk about things, I follow monetary flows. And when I follow monetary flows, I ignore PR and I ignore what politicians are saying. I just look at what they're doing with their money and where money's flowing. And then all the rest is noise for me. It's not a perfect science because humans are not just money machines. But I do believe that global capital controls the world. And I do believe that we live in crypto world, let's call it in blockchain world or in Bitcoin world. We call it, I call it layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. And I use a blockchain analysis to help me understand the world. I believe in the traditional world, we are run by global financial institutions. At the very top, layer 1 is a central bank. And almost all central banks are connected with the exceptions of ones that aren't connected. So PBOC, which is the Central Bank of China, is not connected to the Federal Reserve, Bank for International Settlements, Bank of England, International Monetary Fund, World Bank system. That is one layer. And that layer is not America first, is not European first, is not Britain first. Their job is to use the manipulation of currency in order to transition to a one world currency and one world government controlled by fewer and fewer people. And that is the goal of that layer one. So most people are looking right now at what the Federal Reserve is going to do, what the Bank of England's going to do, what the European Central Bank is going to do, and trying to figure out what, whether they're going to save their stock portfolio by doing quantitative easing and reducing rates, or whether they're actually going to do something like in 1929 that led to a Great Depression and a 1933 confiscation of hard money from American people, which was the last Great Depression. They could do either. They control everything. Underneath them is layer two, which is a mafia network. That mafia network is often called the deep state, or it's called intelligence. It's called MI6. It's called CIA. It's called Mossad. And it has its jurisdictions, which is host states, America, Israel, and Britain. And they co-opt the European Union in order to push them all into one block. And then they move capital around, blackmail, assassinate, kill, to prop up their illegal criminal networks, which is drug trafficking, sex trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking. Underneath that is layer three, which is the government. And the government is just a useful tool for layer one and layer two. Now, with that understanding, you have to understand that no politician is there for the American people, for the British people, for the Europeans, for anybody. And they install people to achieve certain goals. So in COVID, Trump was a vaccine salesperson, as was Boris Johnson. But they put different characters in order to dress up a narrative that makes people find what they're doing acceptable. And so Trump was installed for a very specific purpose. The specific purpose can be understood when you look at who paid for them. And so you can actually look at who paid for Trump. Three main backers paid for Trump. The first one was Elon Musk. Elon Musk wants to usher in a technocracy in a post-state world. And he has various tools that he is given by layer one and layer two. He was given by the CIA and the military-industrial complex the ability to get all of the world's car data, social data, government data through Doge, and everything else that he's going to get through XAI, X, and merging it all together. He is part of the military-industrial complex, and his technology gives a backdoor to the NSA, and so therefore he is allowed to play successful entrepreneur, and he flips between narratives. 1 minute he'll be, I'm the climate change guy, and I'm taking down the oil moguls. Now he is the far right, stamping out all corruption and taking down governments around the world for all of their corruption. Soon he will be I don't believe in tariffs type of person, and his job is to create some strategic tension between the Trump administration and the global institutions that he actually represents. And that's the first backer. And then I'll help you understand how tariffs fit in once you understand how I think. And then maybe it will help you understand whether I'm an idiot or whether you agree. The second backer of Trump was the Mellon family. The Mellon banking family are as global financial institutions as you could get. The banking family are globalists. And we were headed in a direction. The Mellon banking family profited from various wars and the growth of...
Can I stop you real quick? Can you make a distinction between the funding of this campaign and the prior one?
Yeah, I'll go into this one, and then maybe we can look at prior one. But the Mellon banking family, and that was this campaign, what I'm talking about now. So the Mellon...
That's what I was asking for you to clarify that.
Oh, right, got you. Okay, yeah, that is this campaign. So the Mellon banking family and the global financial institutions run by organizations like BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, Vanguard, State Street, the Morgan family, they are the ones that are shareholders of the Federal Reserve System, or they have a different role. Like BlackRock, their job is to gain control of all your pension money and be able to exert influence over the public markets through board seats and shareholder control through ETFs. So these institutions have decided that the old neocon model was going to take us to World War III, and World War III was going to be so disastrous that it would actually affect their profits. And so they have said, we're not going to World War III. We're actually splitting the world up into regions, and we're going to own, BlackRock is going to own shares and assets in all of those regions. One of the regions is a peaceful Middle East for the very first time. We've never seen that, since the Ottoman Empire. So this is a massive change. The second region is China, an economic force, and BRICS that get to invest and build up the global South, while BlackRock gets to asset strip all of the resources under the new China model. The next region is Europe. Europe is being asset stripped, chucked out to die. Europeans are going to be sacrificial lambs because the European Union and the European Central Bank has said, we are scraping the barrel of every final asset we can. How do we do that? Well, we print 800 billion euros. We chuck it all into the military industrial complex. We steal Putin's $350 billion, and we stimulate based upon war, and we push people through fear into a central bank digital currency, the digital euro, which is due to launch in October this year. And Europe is going to be a full-blown surveillance state using the artificial intelligence war technology that was beta tested by Peter Thiel and Palantir in the Middle East through Israel on Gaza. America is going to be split into a region for robotics, stablecoins, and artificial intelligence. And we need it to control the complete ecosystem from energy through to rare earth minerals that can be repurposed into semiconductor chips, manufacturing that is involved in data centers, the batteries that are needed for electric vehicles, and then the components that are needed for AI drones, F-35 fighter jets, anything that's needed for the military industrial complex through the American manufacturing base, right up through to artificial intelligence, which will then be deeply integrated into a stable coin. And that stable coin will be owned by Trump because you delivered the vision for us, so you get a piece of the stable coin. Elon Musk, you get a piece, or you have to deliver for us as a social credit score by combining all these technologies. The Bank of New York, Mellon, is getting a piece of their stable coin. Bank of America is getting their stable coin. JP Morgan's getting their stable coin. In fact, look at the shareholders of the Federal Reserve. They're all getting a piece of the dollar. And Howard Lutnick is the person that's delivering, and from one part of that. Besant, who is a corporate raider that works for George Soros, he was the chief investment officer for the Soros Investment Fund when he made a bet for George Soros that the pound could be shorted relative to the euro with the creation of the European Union and the European Central Bank. And his job was to create an NGO network of open border policies so that you can execute colored revolutions, create chaos anytime you needed to change the world order. And so Besant is that person. The third person that Trump is backed by is Adelson. Adelson is your Israel First. Now, this one's a little bit different because the global financial system has invested in both China, BRICS, America, they're divesting from Europe, they're divesting from America in a certain extent, apart from artificial intelligence, robotics, and anything to do with controlling the dollar, and any data plays. Global capital is remaining there. But in order to have a peaceful Middle East, there is a regime change that happened in both Iran, and there is a regime change that is about to happen in Israel, I believe. The reason for that is if you look at all the military companies and look at their budgets, they are exiting the Middle East, and this was done over the last 3 years, and entering the European area and the Asia Pacific area. And so they need to take their money out of Middle East and move it over. The reason you know that is because the sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East are now on the board of BlackRock. So the Middle East, over these years, over this multi-decade period, moved into a block called the GCC. It's the Gulf Cooperation Corporations. And they control vast wealth, just like China has vast sovereign wealth. Now, remember, the narrative that you're taught about China is that they're in debt, they're fucked, their economy's about to crash, their real estate's about to drop. That was an American narrative. The reality is they have $3 trillion of reserves and a state banking system. That means that because Xi Jinping does not need to worry about what their people think of him, he can exert a multi-decade strategy with no distraction about left and right, Republican, Democrat, and constant turnover. And he has invested significantly in his country. Infrastructure is unbelievable. Education is unbelievable. The amount of investment, robotics is way ahead of America. Artificial intelligence seems like it's ahead of America, but America, still has its AI data center, because the same investors in the Middle East are the same investors in China and the same investors in the American industry. So the Israel first part is Israel had a chance to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. And then this all fits together, and I will get back to tariffs. But I think the background needs to be understood. Netanyahu, unfortunately, failed at that mission. And the CIA also engaged in an operation to weaken Europe, blow up Nord Stream pipeline, kill the manufacturing base in Europe, and asset strip Europe for the benefit of the American ecosystem of the military-industrial complex, AI, and various other things. The military-industrial complex has changed all their products to cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. Wars are not going to be fought the old way. There will be no World War III. There is a way more profitable model that they want to take us to. And so Europe was the sacrificial lamb, as it said. Europeans are not, it's why every European knows that their leader doesn't represent them. They look at the unelected officials at the European Union saying, what the hell? We can't even eat. Why are you, we're choosing between eating and heating, and you're sending our money to Ukraine. It's already been revealed that all that money is corrupt, and those weapons are just going into funding and weaponizing ISIS, Al Qaeda, and other groups that are there to disrupt the regions. And it's become this ginormous weapons, this just weapons laundering, which is why that network was set up in the first place. So put all that together, and you have right now strategic escalation to de-escalate. So Trump is going to be known as the guy that created peace in the Middle East. He's going to take that title. He's escalating in Yemen. He's escalating in Lebanon. He's escalating in Gaza. He's escalating in the West Bank. He's escalating in Somalia. He's escalating all of the wars in all the different regions. But it is to give Israel and Syria, but it is to give Israel strategic negotiation power, because they are no longer useful to the military-industrial complex. Israel is a jurisdiction which was created by the Rothschild family in order to have a jurisdiction and a safe harbor for the mafia and the mob, is no longer useful because the Middle East is going to move to a region of peace for the first time. And the only reason that's happening is because they have so much economic power as a bloc. And so this whole strategic tension that if you've listened to like Operation Gladio and the Colonel and stuff, the strategic tension between Israel and Iran is about to come to an end, and we're about to hit to a normalization. And the GCC are going to be the next power brokers of capital within their bloc. They're going to invest in China, they're going to invest in America, and it's all going to be AI, it's all going to be robotics, it's all going to be blockchain assets, it's all going to be stable coins, central bank digital currencies, all of that technology, surveillance technology, biometric technology, AI warfare, all of that stuff that is currently being built. Right, so with that background, that is the landscape, that is the vision that global finance wants. And it wants Europe to be a central bank digital currency. It wants America to be a stable coin controlled by intelligence assets that give a backdoor to the NSA through stable coins. The BRICS corridor is their own corridor, and the GCC is run by monarchs, and they have their own corridor, and they're going to go into an area of peace. That means that all money is outflowing from America and Europe into global south, into China, into the Middle East, and into the regions that are all going to have their role because they find it way more profitable to invest in this new environment, in this new world of blocks. So the answer to the original question, are we moving to multipolar? I absolutely believe we are moving to multipolar. Now you get to the Trump administration. So we know that his backers is a technocrat, a banker, a banking oligarch family, and an Israel first. And his job, everything he has done in the last 60 days is to push forward that agenda. He gave Israel strategic negotiation power because they are economically destroyed. Israel has no power without Europe and America. America is going to have capital outflow. Europe is going to be destroyed. So therefore, Israel is no longer useful to the military-industrial complex and global finance. And so they're giving it as much strategic power so that it can negotiate with the economic powers in the region. And soon you'll see Iran announce the same deal that Trump tore up in 2018. It was called the JCPOA. It was a nuclear deal. You'll probably hear, my guess, based upon capital again, you'll see that Iran has normalized with the region, and potentially Israel will be asked to sign up to the same deal as Iran because they have to disclose their illegal nukes that they assassinated JFK to steal from America. And finally, they have to actually adhere to, as part of this negotiation, those rules. Now, it may not look exactly like it, but that's what I think the Middle East is going to look like. And they're going to make a shit ton of money out of this new great growth region. AI, China and America are simply conduits for artificial intelligence and robotics. Now, let's look at what Trump has done. He gave Israel that strategic negotiation, and he's going to take credit for creating peace in the Middle East, and he's going to be known as the hero for doing it. He is actually negotiating with Palestinians' life. The more Palestinians die right now, the more negotiation power he has. And he doesn't really care about that. This is just a tick for tack. And Israel, Netanyahu and Trump are in the same game. But Netanyahu is defeated. He visited Hungary last week. I think his exit, I think there's going to be a regime change and he won't go to prison. He'll be given exile within Hungary, and he'll be forgiven for all of his crimes as as a tool for the military-industrial complex to create the murder that we needed in order to kind of go to this. So he had till the Trump administration to succeed at genociding or ethnically cleansing Palestinians with us being okay with it, and he failed. So he's been So he's no longer got that. So there is a new negotiation. Right. So those are the blocks. Now you look at what Trump has done. He gave Israel that power. He gave all of the technology. He repurposed the entire model of America so that you can rebuild the manufacturing base, not for Americans, for the bits that have to happen in America to have a fully autonomous AI and robotics center. And if you look at all the tariffs of the materials that are exempt from tariffs, is everything that's needed for AI, whether it be steel, whether it be the electric vehicles, whether it be battery, whether it be semiconductor components, anything that is needed for that AI and robotics world that Elon paid for, that is exempt from tariffs. Now, everything else is irrelevant when it comes to tariffs. There are relevance. Europe is going to fight back. They're going to lose. Europe is irrelevant. They're going to do reciprocal tariffs. America's going to win. Anything they do leads to the sacrifice. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, because they're meant to be sacrificed. Europe is going to get really rough. It's going to get so rough that they're going to use all of their forces in order to create strategic hate, strategic tension. They're going to say it's the Islamists that has taken over the world. It's the migrants' faults. And all of that is going to be utilized because they want to see and beta test how far can we go with a central bank digital currency. So that's the Elon piece. Then you got the banker piece. How do you get there? All right, you do Liberation Day. Liberation Day is not liberation for America from the world. Liberation Day is the rest of the world being liberated from America, which is hosted by the Federal Reserve and has got the American government $37 trillion in debt, asset stripped it, wiped out the middle class, and destroyed middle class Americans. Trump is, you're missing the point if you think that I'm dissing on Trump. This is systemic. This would have been the same, but a different flavor. If we had kept with Harris, if Harris had won, then we'd be in World War III. Trump was a recognition that Netanyahu didn't achieve his goal and Russia won the war, and therefore America needs to do a strategic retreat and focus on this new multipolar world because the hegemon is dead. It no longer exists. It's over. And so you look at all the other tariffs. The tariffs are going to shrink the American economy, which is why right now they're giving you a bunch of narratives. One of those narratives is that Trump is here in order to take on the Federal Reserve, force them to reduce interest rates so that you can renegotiate the $10 trillion of debt. The $10 trillion of debt, if you listen to Scott Bessent, is not going to be refinanced by the rate that the Federal Reserve control. That's called short-term treasuries. It's going to be renegotiated by long-term 10-year and 30-year bonds. Those rates are up. The dollar is down because it is strategically saying we're going to work on our deficit. In economics, there's a concept that you may have heard of and everybody should look up called Triffin's dilemma. Triffin's dilemma means that anybody that has the world reserve currency, and this is what happened to the British Empire, anybody that has the world reserve currency has to export their currency globally. And because the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England created a debt-based Ponzi scheme, every dollar is debt. So when someone says to you, we're going to repay the debt, what they're saying is we're going to send the economy into a depression. Because every dollar is debt. You can't pay down the debt. Losing $37 trillion of dollars is economic Armageddon. So the debt always needs to be rolled over. So we can stop pretending that that's what we're doing. This was, as I said, if you look back at what happened to the British Empire, it got so much debt, so much complication, so much war, that it became so complicated that it needed to strategically retreat and hand over to the Federal Reserve. That's what World War I and World War II was. It was that transition. the world has got so complicated that every single analyst that you speak to, and I'm talking about really intelligent people, can't figure out what the hell's going on. Because as soon as someone says, all right, he's trying to refinance the debt, but when you refinance the debt, that creates a lower rate that forces the head of the Fed, but then that's weakening the economy. Now we've lost $9 trillion of global capital, which has been going out of America and into other assets. And that's pushing up the rates of the long-term treasury. So it's going to actually be more expensive to refinance the debt. Plus, that crashes the dollar, which means that the debt's getting more expensive to service. And everyone goes through all of these circles and none of them can figure out what the exact strategy is, because the strategy is chaos. The strategy is to create absolute carnage. And what is that carnage going to actually do? It's going to wipe out, just like COVID, Trump's COVID operation, which was a vaccine salesperson for Big Pharma. Trump is a salesman. Besant calls himself a bond salesman. Trump is a salesman for the technocracy and the new vision that the banks have for the world. And so what happens when you do a trade war with China? Okay, so we're currently saying the narrative you're being told is that we're rebuilding the American manufacturing base. Right, we know a few things. If you implement a tariff on China, firstly, it would take you minimum 5 years to rebuild an ounce of the manufacturing base in order to actually do what China can do at 1,000 times the price. If you want to rebuild the manufacturing base, the reason that China is the world's manufacturer is because they have sweatshops and they violate all sorts of human rights. They work 7 hours a day. Sorry, they work 7 days a week. They work 10, 12, 14 hours a day. They have no holiday. They get paid significantly less than any American. And, you know, they're in an ultra competitive labor market with a huge manufacturing base, with a world that wants to buy their goods. And remember, China didn't do an IMF terrorist organization. They did a Belt and Road Initiative, which was, we're not going to interfere in your politics. We're going to invest in your country as long as you buy our goods. And we want you to become as big and grow as fast as possible to buy more of our goods. It wasn't an IMF policy of economic destruction and economic hitmen in order to submit the country into having a puppet government that then was asset stripped and used currency warfare in order to make sure that all the money, they borrowed dollars and those dollars came back to the gangsters that run layer 2. That's the IMF model. That's the Belt and Road. So that is a very different model. Now, if you are a small business in America and you have no choice but to buy your goods from China because they're not available in America and you can't afford the price that they come from in any other region, and you've already negotiated that whole line that your small business relies upon in order to make your sales in America, China's just going to say, okay, we'll do reciprocal tariffs. So America goes to 104%. China's now at 84%. We'll do reciprocal tariffs, and we don't care about Chinese people's savings because we've got our manufacturing base. We'll just correct the currency to offset any tariff. So China can just say, all right, we'll push the value of the currency down that will offset any tariff. And now you're just essentially, taking your dollars and paying the same price. Or if they don't manipulate the currency, they'll say, right, you are now paying 40% more for your import. And the business in America has two choices. One is they could say, we'll take the hit because we got a 40% margin and we had a 60% margin before. We'll now only have a 20% margin and we'll keep our prices the same. Or they say, we're going to put our prices up 40%. We're not sure which one they're going to do and what everyone's going to do. But we do know that most businesses in America don't have a 60% margin to play with. And so they're going to go bust, or they're going to put their prices up, and Americans are going to have to find more money in order to pay for it. And so either the price of the good goes up or the business goes bust. What happened during COVID? Small business went bust, consolidate into large global financial institutions and technocracies. This is the same thing again. Large institutions, what is Apple going to do? Apple's going to say, well, I'm invested in China anyway. I'm invested in the Middle East. We've got different bases everywhere. And Trump, do me a favor. We'll do a little deal here. Tim Cook will walk into the door and we'll say, hey, we're Apple. You know, we're going to do this. You're going to do that. We're going to get a tax credit here. You'll get a little deal there. We'll reinvest that through Vietnam. We'll push it through and we'll have our base in Ireland. And our island, we'll put 500 billion into here. And you can take that 500 billion factory and use it for the military industrial complex. But just don't tax us anything. Don't charge us any tariffs. And we'll work it out. That's what every large institution in the world is doing right now in America. So it's a tax on small business. That's it. And if they don't pass that tax on, it will then be a higher price. And I'm sorry to deliver this message to you, because this isn't a Trump derangement syndrome. This is a better model, but the model is the same. It's always for the organizations that bought America and bought Trump and bought Harris and bought Biden and bought Bush and bought Clinton and bought Obama. America decided that it would create a model where their politicians are for sale to the highest bidder. Your country is controlled by global financial institutions, and they are what control Trump. And Trump is there to say, this is America first. America first means who is America? America is global corporations that control the damn world and are invested all around the world. They don't give a shit about America, and they'll be there for as long as America's profitable. But as soon as the Federal Reserve fucks something up, they'll be gone and they'll move on. And so Americans need to look after themselves. Trump's not here to save you. He's lying to you, I'm sorry. They are all part of a greater system, and the system is bigger than any one politician because they're layer 3. They're not layer 1. If you want to change America, you do not need tax reform. You need monetary reform. And the reason that I told people to vote for Trump is because there is a Bitcoin strategic reserve and there is a stablecoin regulations that are coming through. The banks and financial institutions are trying to get in the way of those right now. BlackRock has said, we'll get all of our buddies into Bitcoin. And BlackRock, Larry Fink, who is one of those people that is way more important than Trump. Listen to Larry Fink, don't listen to Trump. Larry Fink is saying, own Bitcoin, it could replace the dollar as the world reserve currency over the next few years. And BlackRock literally used the Federal Reserve and the SEC in order to create that bank run story, wipe out the crypto-friendly banks, approve the Bitcoin ETF, and get every single global financial institution into Bitcoin because they knew what they're going to execute right now. As soon as Trump came in, he was going to implement tariffs. April the 2nd was going to be Liberation Day for the world against America. And all of the small businesses are going to get wiped out, consolidated, because their goal and why they pay Trump is to get us to one world reserve currency with a technocracy in a stateless society. And we're going to be there in 10 years. And your job is to see between the lines, recognize what's happening, and say F you to any politician and just focus on yourself, your community, and do whatever you can, because there is one very unique opportunity. If ever there was an opportunity to end the Fed, have Bitcoin strategic reserves, take down the fractional reserve system with stable coins, it is today. And there is a massive group of people that have benefited from this system that own stocks and real estate that are saying, I'm about to retire, the boomers. Look, just please do QE. Just please, Trump, reverse this policy. Please, Trump, get back to the status quo. I want to sell my real estate. I want to sell my stocks. and fuck everyone else because I just want to be able to retire with the wealth that I thought I had, because I can't afford and I'm not going to get back to work. And those young people, they got their whole life ahead of them. Yeah, they're screwed by the system, but I can't get back to work. And so all those people are saying, let's get rid of Trump. Let's make sure that you go back to QE. Let's not end the Fed. I don't want this to happen. And that is the battle. There is a battle right now between decentralization and centralization, and they want you to be distracted thinking that Trump is the Messiah that's going to protect you. I'm sorry, if you rely on Trump, make sure you follow what he's doing. He's investing in the Middle East. He's investing in China. He's investing in Bitcoin. And he is asset stripping America for his buddies in a world of artificial intelligence and robotics. And everyone on that administration is profiting from that transition. Follow their money, not what they say. You'll get wrecked if you think he's looking to help middle-class Americans. The manufacturing base is nothing but a conduit for the military-industrial complex, for a social credit score, for a stateless world of artificial intelligence, and that's all it is. That's the manufacturing base. So you got to repossession yourself accordingly, and that's what I'd say.